Games Workshop have sent me the new Chaos Knight Ruinator, and today we are going to find out what is the point of this knight. Should we be excited? What does it do on the tabletop? I'm going to build one up and make some conversions to it while we discuss the latest addition to the Chaos Knight's army. It's tabletop time. So your army getting a new model every single edition? Well, this is probably one of the best changes with the new Games Workshop approach to releases. I think it's great that you get at least something for your faction every round, and it's Chaos Knight's turn. We got the awesome War Dogs last time they got a codex, but this time we get the Knight Ruinator, which is another sprue added into the existing Knight Desecrator Abominant box. Now there's a couple of things to note here. Let's really talk about what's being replaced. None of the armor panels are being replaced, none of the chassis pieces are being replaced, there's no new head. What we're getting here is a different weapon for each of the arms, as well as a carapace or chest mounted weapon, which is a small rocket pod roughly the size of a Chaos Space Marine Havoc launcher on either of the chest pieces. The two new weapons are a flamer and a drill, which are quite visually interesting. However, rules-wise, I wasn't so impressed. And this leads into that question of, well, what is it and what is this knight for? The knight has a rule that functionally says it chooses a target on the battlefield, it has an advantage to killing that target, and once it kills that target, it can select another target. It makes it a very good hunter, it's basically hunter's mark, and its weapons are supposedly designed to complement that. However, when I look at these parts, I start to question how useful they are in a Chaos Knight's army. So the drill weapon on this knight is called a fell bore, and the rules are a bit of a bore in my opinion. It has anti-vehicle, anti-monster 2+, which means it's going to wound vehicles and monsters on a 2-up. However, most heavy knight weapons are doing that anyway, unless they're fighting super heavies. It is in fact identical to the Reaper Chainsword, but a little bit worse, with a lower number of attacks on its sweep profile and less AP. This means it's going to be less effective fighting infantry, but I'm not even sure it's that much more effective fighting vehicles and monsters. As its aura ability wants it to get close to enemies, I do think this is kind of competing for a slot with the Knight Rampager. And the Knight Rampager gets a pile of attacks with better profile weapons and options. The Thunderstrike Gauntlet is far more effective at killing heavy targets, and with 6 attacks and sustained hits, I would rather have a Knight Rampager charging towards my enemies. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad unit. I think rules-wise it's fine. I can totally see it being quite effective at killing a bunch of Marine equivalents with both of its missiles and its flamethrower. But I do feel like it doesn't really seem to have a strong niche. If you use its special ability to target a unit of infantry and you focus on killing them, and then the melee weapon, which is geared towards fighting a single heavy target, is being slightly underutilized. Not too much though. Whereas if you double down and select your hunter's mark on a vehicle or monster, you're not gaining too huge an advantage. And the big problem here, and the reason I think the Rampager really just takes the cake for me, is that WS2+. Also here, I'm going to super briefly mention, because I haven't, Knights profiles have changed. So all of the Chaos Knights have gotten a few additional wounds, but all the Knights in the book have dropped a wound across the board. It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out on the tabletop. Early in my wargaming history, all of the options that you can find in this Chaos Knight box, with the exception of perhaps the Knight Abominant, would have been a single data sheet. There would have been a single entry and just a bunch of weapon options. And I don't think the Knight Ruinator is really doing much for that. One of my issues with Chaos Knights in general, and knights in fact, is that as they grow in popularity and as we have more and more knights on the table, you start to realize that they all have the exact same silhouette. And if you're a hobbyist first, or even a gamer who wants to clearly identify the models on the tabletop, it does get a little bit silly when you see 5 Questoris chassis knights all in the exact same pose. It's almost like they're doing a coordinated line dance. These limited posing options, specifically in the legs, and continually piling more options onto the same frame, I think is a really interesting choice, and I think most of us would prefer to see the silhouette of the knights broken up and changed. Different chassis, such as the Lancer chassis being taken from Horus Heresy and maybe modified or used in 40k, would be really cool to add more variance in height and shape to our knight armies. I actually think there's a lot of conceptually interesting things happening with this knight. When I saw the drill, I immediately thought of mining, and it reminded me of the heritage that Imperial Knights have with being industrial tools. The flamethrower really doesn't fit with this, and I think extra room on that sprue could have been taken up with other equipment, chassis panels, or something to really turn this into its own class of knight, and really tied in with the mining aesthetic. Then you could have got something like a carapace-mounted siege weapon. I'm thinking something like the Karaknos mortar battery from the Adeptus Mechanicum, and you could have opened up some really interesting design space for this kind of industrial mining machine that blows up seismic charges and is really effective at taking down heavy knights and bunker busting. Not only would it give a visual silhouette that's a bit different, but it would also have its own role on the battlefield. To get a little bit of this and a bit of variance, I had a thought. Why not use the empty hardpoint on top of the Chaos Knight? Yes, all Chaos Knights have a slot for a hull weapon, and yet none of the variants that officially use a Chaos Knight hull actually utilize this, which boggles my mind, and this is design space I think they could have used on this kit. So what I'm going to do is convert the 2 chest missile pods into a missile pod that can be mounted on the roof of this knight, breaking up the silhouette and making it look like a unique war machine. To do this, I pilfer a spare Icarus autocannon array from a standard Questoris Knight kit that I have lying around for my Chaos Knights, because of course we do get to use those Loyalist Knights in our faction. And then I clip off the tags and glue these missiles onto the sides. It's super easy to greeble something like this. I use a pair of thigh pads from some Solar Auxilia to hide cables that I pulled from my box of spare Knight parts. Overall, it's a super simple conversion, but I think it looks awesome and it creates a whole different vibe for this Knight. Now, rocket pods on the roof has been done before, but I do think big seismic charges or something would have been really cool. Or even just alternate shoulder pads or tilting plates. Anything to break up the visual identity of the multiple Knights that you're going to have duplicated on the tabletop. I'm curious to know if you all agree with me on this. I understand that most people are going to be super hyped that we're getting anything. However, it's going to mean a repackage and probably a price hike as well, which I don't think anyone is going to be particularly happy with. So, how do we make our silhouettes look a bit different? Well, I'm going to share with you a technique you can use at home to convert your Chaos Knight legs. I think changing the pose of the legs is the single greatest thing we can do to make our Chaos Knights all look a bit distinct. And I'm going to go with the simplest version of that. The limitation we have on the Chaos Knight is the thighs. Because the peg is on one side and there's no detailing on that side, the thighs cannot be swapped left to right. However, the lower legs can. These are digitigrade legs, so for description's purposes, I wish I could say the knee joint, but they kind of have like 2 knee joints. I don't know how these legs work. That upper joint in the leg, you slice between the upper thigh and that joint, and use a knife very carefully and then clean and trim all of this excess away. The main thing here is to make sure you keep that power cable on the lower section of the leg. Cut it away from the thigh. And the reason you're doing this is going to allow you to mirror the pose really easily. You can of course cut all of the joints in the legs and do a more detailed conversion, but today I want to do the simplest, safest, and most easily replicatable one, so all of you at home can try it yourselves. So what I'm aiming for is to simply swap the legs and mirror the pose, so it'll be left leg forward, right leg back. Now that's the only cut you have to do in the legs. You just have to make sure you do that on all parts on both the left and the right leg. And then there is a ball joint. Well, it's the semblance of a ball joint that connects the ankles to the feet. You have to trim all of this away too because it's posed at a specific angle that allows it to connect to the foot. Thankfully, this isn't necessary to glue the foot together, although you will need to clean this up with some green stuff or putty later, just to build that sphere shape up again. Once all the parts are separated, you can glue the halves together, and then you basically have left leg upper and lower, right leg upper and lower. Now you need some plasticard. I went for plasticard that I believe was 1 millimeter thick, and cut it into thin strips and then glued it onto the leg. This creates a buffer and replaces all of that plastic material you carved away when you separated the joints. With these ready, you can chop the tags off the upper legs and glue them into position. And what I did is I only chopped one off first so I could basically copy that exact pose on the other side. With these legs in place, you then are replacing the left lower leg with the right and gluing them into place using those cables as your guides for exactly how far you should rotate them. With these put together and one leg glued on, you can then attach the other leg using the feet as a guide to get the pose correct. And if you've done this all correctly, you'll find that the pistons that are supposed to attach don't need to be chopped, changed, or anything. You just simply swap them. Because of course the shortened piston on the inside of the leg now just has to be turned around because it's on the left rather than the right and vice versa. This is not a basic conversion. I'd say it's moderate to advanced. You need to be confident with your plasticard and your cutting, but I do think with a single joint cut here, it is probably the easiest leg repose you're going to do, and hopefully you like the outcome. But it does mean that with 3 Chaos Knights, not one of my Knights has the same pose, which I think looks really good on the tabletop. And hopefully it's something you can do as well at home. However, As I go up to the torso of the knight that I'm building, I have to reveal my dirty little secret. I'm not even building a Knight Ruinator. That's right, I'm building a Knight Abominant. The Knight Abominant is so cool, it's oozing with personality, it has unique weapons, it has a tail, it has all these things that make it different. And for that reason, I want to add one to my army. Because overall, my opinion on the Knight Ruinator as a model and as a unit in the faction is that it doesn't really do anything interesting at all. So I'd prefer to add in the Knight Abominant because the number of shots on Volkite weapons has increased. So hopefully that main weapon will be a little bit more interesting. Now, I'm a snowflake when it comes to making my armies in the sense that I want them all to be unique, you know, like a snowflake. And right when it launched, I bought the Forge World Chaos Knight kit, and I've been looking for a reason to use the resin parts for a long time. By mixing and matching panels, I can ensure that all of my knights are different. So on this, I'm using these cool resin Forge World pieces that are now, I think, discontinued, so that it will be not only unique for me, but unique to other knights that other people have, which means all three of my Questoris-sized knights will have their own strong sense of identity. There's a little bit of effort that's taken with some hot water bending to make sure this does fit on top, but overall, I'm really happy with how this came together. That is not the end of my knight update though. It's been a while since I've brought my knights out on the channel. And last time I kind of sold something as finished that never was. That's right, my Dark Mechanicus knight that serves as the Knight Desecrator in my army, or a Knight Styrax if I swap the magnetized weapons, never had the weathering and a bunch of the freehand done on the armor panels, and the armor panels weren't even glued on. So to fully reinvigorate me and re-inspire me and give something spicy for the reveals for this video, I also decided to paint up those panels, do some cool freehand, and finally finish this knight. I use transfers a lot here, but I also paint over them a little bit, especially for the sketchy runes, using Lamian Medium to dull them down and little dabs of stippled paint to blend them back in with the paintwork so that you can't tell there's transfers anymore. As for the Mechanicum logo, well, it's changed from the spider that it used to be because of course that was a legitimate Dark Forge. I've now made up my own Dark Forge Charybdis. So I paint this logo up on those top panels and you can see the Alpha Legion logo incorporated with the cog, but for Charybdis, it's inverted with the cog taking precedence up the top. And hopefully this vaguely looks like a squid or a sea creature because that's the whole vibe of my Alpha Legion Dark Mechanicus alliance. These knights were lost survivors of House Atrax, tortured and abandoned, found on a desolate battlefield, given a new home by Charybdis during the Horus Heresy. From a scattered few knight chassis, they slowly regained strength as a splintered shard of a once proud knight house. With all of those paint jobs done and of course my brand new Knight Abominant all built, it's time that I show you what I've been working on. So let's check out my knight house in all of its current glory, and I'd love to hear from you what you think about the Knight Ruinator. Thank you so much to our patrons for all your support. Your names are scrolling down the screen right now. And I've also been enjoying your mini review, which we recently filmed on the channel, where we got to see some of the awesome stuff you painted and provide some critique, feedback, really whatever you asked for. If you'd like to get in on that kind of content, see Murray, Jen, and my reactions to your paint in or out of the lines, consider joining our Patreon. The links are in the description, and it really does help us keep making this kind of content. So there we have it. What do you think? Are you a fan of the new Chaos Knight Ruinator? Look, my overall opinion is to get anything is really good. So I'm glad we're seeing new kits, and the new weapon options are kinda cool, at least visually. However, I think I highlighted earlier my feelings about them being all kind of monopose, and the more knights we get that use the same kit, the less variance your army kind of gets across the whole. Chaos Knights are lucky in that we have this extra kit, the Chaos Knight kit. We can kind of use regular Armigers, Chaos Armigers, regular Questoris, Chaos Questoris, and we get a little bit more variety across the army. But overall, in future releases for Chaos Knights, if we're gonna be giving extra sprues to our vehicles, I would love to see, more than anything, make use of that hard point. Every single Chaos Knight chassis has a slot in the top of it for you to put a weapon, and there are no unique Chaos weapons for that slot. And as I proved with my conversion that, as you know, I didn't use, you can make a pretty cool little rocket pod or something up there. So I would love to see this in the future. I'm still really hyped. I think the latest Knight addition to my army is cool, and we gotta love an Abominant. And I'm really happy with the conversion of the legs, and hopefully you'll be able to kind of do the same at home if you wanna make your Chaos Knights look a little bit different. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe. Check out the videos in the end cards. One of them will be an earlier video where I painted up these knights. Oh, and also, yeah, it was cool to finally finish the freehand on my second knight. All right, see you in the next one.